28 candles, one wish, Dad gone. I granted it, starting with a clean cut, rent, utilities, car, all severed. The fallout? You won't believe. The chocolate cake balanced perfectly in my hands as I approached the back patio door, 28 candles tucked safely in my shirt pocket. Through the glass, I could see my son Brandon surrounded by his friends, their laughter mixing with the evening air. The April weather was perfect for his birthday celebration, warm enough for an outdoor gathering, but cool enough to keep everyone comfortable. I paused at the threshold, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like an animated conversation. Brandon stood near the barbecue grill with his usual crowd, Mike and Jason flanking him while Samantha scrolled through her phone at the nearby table. The scene looked exactly like what any father would hope to see on his son's special day, but something in their body language made me hesitate. The way Brandon gestured with his beer bottle, the knowing looks exchanged between his friends, the casual dismissiveness in their posture. I found myself listening instead of entering, and what I heard changed everything. "Your dad really pulled out all the stops tonight," Mike was saying, gesturing around the decorated patio. "New sound system, premium drinks, even got that catering service for the appetizers." Brandon took a long drink before responding, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. "Yeah, well, that's his thing. Thinks he can buy his way into being relevant in my life." The words hit me like ice water. I stood frozen, cake trembling slightly in my grip. "At least he cares enough to try," Jason offered, but Brandon's laugh cut through any warmth in the suggestion. "Care? He hovers over every decision I make, lectures me about responsibility every chance he gets. The man acts like I'm still 12 years old instead of 28. My chest tightened. Was this really how my son saw our relationship? As some kind of power struggle where my concern was perceived as control? "Maybe he's just worried about you," Samantha chimed in, finally looking up from her screen. "Parents do that." "Worried?" Brandon's voice rose slightly. "He's obsessed with micromanaging my life. Gets on my case about finding a job, moving out, taking responsibility, like he doesn't understand that the job market is brutal right now." I pressed myself closer to the door, unable to move away despite the growing pain in my chest. This was my son talking about me to his friends, revealing feelings he'd never expressed directly. Mike nodded sympathetically. "Parents from that generation don't get how different things are now. They think it's still the 70s where you just walk into a company and demand a job." "Exactly," Brandon continued, warming to his theme. "He has this whole spreadsheet mentality about everything. Plans out my entire future like I'm some kind of engineering project he needs to solve. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was an engineer. And yes, I did approach problems methodically. But I'd never realized that Brandon saw my guidance as manipulation rather than care." Jason raised his bottle in a mock toast. "Here's to controlling parents who think they know what's best for everyone else." The group laughed, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. These weren't just casual complaints about parental oversight. This was genuine resentment, years of accumulated frustration being aired in my absence. "You know what the worst part is?" Brandon continued, his voice taking on a bitter edge. "He acts like I should be grateful for every little thing he does, like providing for his own son is some kind of heroic sacrifice that deserves constant appreciation." Samantha giggled. "Oh God, the guilt trips must be legendary. You have no idea. Every conversation somehow circles back to what he's done for me, how much he's invested in my future, how I need to show more responsibility. It's exhausting." I wanted to defend myself, to explain that every lecture came from love, every concern from genuine care about his well-being. But standing there listening to his unfiltered honesty, I began to wonder if I'd been blind to how my words actually landed. "What you need," Mike said with the confidence of someone who'd never supported another person financially, "is some distance. Parents like that don't change until you force boundaries." "Trust me, I've thought about it," Brandon replied. "Sometimes I fantasize about what life would be like if he just wasn't around to comment on every choice I make." The casual cruelty of that statement made me step backward, nearly dropping the cake I'd spent hours preparing. My own son was fantasizing about my absence from his life. "Come on," Jason laughed. "You don't mean that." But Brandon's next words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. "Actually, you know what would be the perfect birthday gift? If the old man just disappeared from my life forever. No more lectures, no more guilt trips, no more having to pretend I'm grateful for stuff I never asked for. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Even his friends appeared taken aback by the vehemence in his voice. "Brandon, that's pretty harsh," Samantha said quietly. "Is it? He's been suffocating me for years, making every conversation about his expectations, his disappointment in my choices, his vision of what my life should look like." Brandon's voice carried a finality that made my blood run cold. Honestly, everyone would be happier if he just found somewhere else to be, permanently. I stood there, holding a birthday cake for someone who wished I would vanish from existence. 28 years of midnight feedings, bedtime stories, school projects, driving lessons, college tuition, and countless hours of worry had led to this moment of casual cruelty. The gift in my other hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Inside that carefully wrapped box was my father's watch, a family heirloom passed down through 3 generations. I'd planned to present it with a speech about legacy, about the importance of family connections across time. Now it seemed like a symbol of everything Brandon found burdensome about our relationship. Through the glass, I watched my son take another drink, completely unaware that his father stood just feet away, absorbing every word of his devastating honesty. His friends had moved on to other topics, but I remained frozen, processing the magnitude of what I'd just learned. This wasn't teenage rebellion or temporary frustration with parental guidance. This was genuine, deep-seated resentment from a grown man who saw my love as manipulation, my concern as control, and my presence in his life as something to be endured rather than valued. The party continued around them, music playing, conversations flowing, everyone enjoying the celebration I'd funded and organized for someone who secretly wished I would disappear forever. The decorations I'd hung that morning, the food I'd ordered, the sound system I'd rented, all of it suddenly seemed like props in a performance where I was the unwitting villain. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking so badly that the cake nearly slipped from my grip. Inside the house, my kitchen waited with more decorations, more evidence of my pathetic attempt to create a perfect birthday celebration for someone who found my very existence burdensome. The watch felt heavier with each step I took away from that devastating conversation. 3 generations of men had worn this timepiece, each passing it down with pride to sons who valued the connection it represented. Now it would go to someone who saw family legacy as just another form of unwanted obligation. I set the cake down on the kitchen counter and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. When had I become this person? This hovering, controlling figure that my own son wished would vanish? Had I been so focused on being a good father that I'd failed to notice I was suffocating the person I was trying to protect? The sound of laughter drifted in from the patio, a reminder that Brandon's world continued perfectly fine without my participation. Better than fine, according to what I'd just overheard. He was happier discussing my absence than he'd ever seemed in my presence. 28 years of believing that love meant guidance, that caring required involvement, that being a good father meant staying connected to every aspect of his life. But standing in my kitchen, surrounded by birthday decorations for someone who wished I would disappear, I realized that maybe the greatest gift I could give my son was exactly what he'd asked for. The question wasn't whether I had the strength to leave. The question was whether I had the courage to grant his birthday wish in a way that would teach him exactly what my disappearance actually meant. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house creaked around me with familiar sounds that had once brought comfort, but now felt like echoes of a life I'd misunderstood completely. In my dresser drawer, beneath old tax documents and insurance papers, I found the folder I'd been avoiding for months. Bank statements, 5 years' worth of automatic transfers, utility payments, grocery bills, car insurance premiums. Numbers that told the story of a father who thought he was helping and a son who saw it as control. $2,800 every month for rent he'd never paid. $350 for utilities he'd never questioned. $400 for food he'd never thanked me for. The math was brutal in its clarity. $50,000 annually. $250,000 over 5 years. My retirement savings, my emergency fund, my financial security, all flowing into the lifestyle of someone who wished I would disappear. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by evidence of my own foolishness. Every canceled check represented a conversation I should have had, a boundary I should have set, a lesson in responsibility I should have taught instead of simply writing another check. The memories came flooding back with painful precision. Last spring, when Brandon had demanded I co-sign for a car he couldn't afford. The dealership visit where he'd rolled his eyes at my suggestions, treating me like an embarrassing relative who didn't understand that image mattered more than practicality. I'd signed anyway, desperate to maintain some connection with a son who seemed to drift further away with each passing year. Then there was the Christmas dinner debacle. I'd invited his friends, hoping to bridge the gap between us by showing interest in his social circle. Instead, I'd watch them mock my stories, dismiss my attempts at conversation, and treat me like hired help who happened to own the house where they were eating. Brandon had laughed along, encouraging their disrespect with his silence. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. Birthday parties where I was tolerated rather than welcomed. Family dinners where my presence felt more like an obligation than a choice. Conversations that died whenever I entered the room, then resumed with animated energy once I left. How long had I been deluding myself about our relationship? How many years had I spent interpreting basic politeness as affection, tolerance as love, manipulation as mutual respect? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my neighbor Frank, asking if everything was okay because the music seemed louder than usual. Even Frank had noticed that something was different about tonight's celebration. I typed back a quick response about it being Brandon's birthday, but the interaction reminded me of something important. Frank had been divorced for 15 years. His ex-wife had remarried, his kids had moved across the country, and he'd rebuilt his entire life around his own interests and priorities. He seemed genuinely content with his independence, his freedom from family obligations that had once defined every aspect of his existence. What would that feel like? To wake up without worrying about someone else's problems, to make decisions based on my own needs instead of constantly calculating how they might affect Brandon's comfort level, to spend my money on things I wanted instead of subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was 62 years old. If I was careful with my finances, I had at least 20 good years left. 20 years that could be mine, instead of dedicated to someone who found my presence burdensome. I pulled out my laptop and began researching something I'd never seriously considered before. Real estate values in my neighborhood. The house had appreciated significantly over the years, and with the current market conditions, I was sitting on nearly $800,000 in equity. Money that could fund a very comfortable retirement somewhere far from California. Somewhere Brandon would never think to look for a father he'd wished would vanish. The idea crystallized with startling clarity. He wanted me gone from his life? Fine. But he seemed to have forgotten that his comfortable lifestyle depended entirely on my continued presence and financial support. Without my mortgage payments, utility contributions, and grocery subsidies, his world would collapse faster than he could find a job to replace what I'd been providing. My fingers moved across the keyboard with growing confidence, researching retirement communities in states I'd never seriously considered. Arizona, with its warm weather and reasonable cost of living. Colorado, where the mountains would provide a dramatic change from California's coastline. North Carolina, where my money would stretch even further and the pace of life matched what I was beginning to crave. Each option represented freedom I hadn't experienced since Brandon was born. The freedom to choose where I lived based on my preferences rather than his needs. The freedom to spend my money on things I enjoyed rather than obligations I'd created through years of misguided generosity. The freedom to disappear from the life of someone who clearly didn't want me in it. The party sounds from downstairs had grown louder, more raucous. Brandon's laughter cut through the music, probably sharing another story about his controlling father with friends who would never understand the sacrifice that funded their entertainment. They were celebrating in my house, eating my food, drinking my alcohol, completely unaware that the man paying for it all had just made a decision that would change everything. I closed the laptop and walked to my closet, pulling out a suitcase I hadn't used in years. Not because I was leaving tonight, but because I needed to start thinking practically about what came next. If I was going to grant Brandon's birthday wish, I needed to do it properly. The engineering part of my mind engaged with problems I hadn't considered in decades. How quickly could I sell the house? What would I need to take with me versus what could be replaced? How much notice should I give Brandon before his world came crashing down around him? Actually, that last question answered itself. He'd wished for me to disappear forever. People who disappear don't give notice. They simply vanish, leaving others to deal with the consequences of their absence. I walked to the window overlooking the backyard where my son continued his celebration. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing animatedly to his friends, probably telling another story about his overbearing father. The same father who'd worked overtime for years to provide the house, the food, the security that made such casual mockery possible. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. Real estate agents, financial advisors, moving companies, the practical steps required to turn a devastating realization into concrete action. Brandon had spent 28 years taking my presence for granted. It was time for him to learn what my absence actually meant. But tonight, I would let him finish his birthday celebration. Let him enjoy one last evening of unconscious entitlement before reality came knocking on the door of the house I'd been paying for while he wished I would disappear from his life. The irony was perfect. He'd asked for the one gift I'd never considered giving, and I was finally ready to provide it. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of recognition that sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is stop enabling behavior that prevents their child from growing up. Brandon wanted independence. He was about to get more independence than he'd ever imagined possible. The morning after Brandon's birthday brought an unusual clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety or obligation, but with the focused energy of someone who'd finally found direction after years of drifting. The house felt different around me, less like a home and more like a project requiring systematic completion. Coffee tasted better when you weren't wondering what demands the day would bring. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, approaching this life change with the same methodical precision I'd once applied to engineering problems. Variables to consider, timelines to establish, resources to allocate efficiently. First priority was understanding the real estate market. I spent an hour researching comparable sales in my neighborhood, analyzing price trends and average time on market. The numbers were encouraging. Houses similar to mine had sold within 2 weeks, often for above asking price. California's housing shortage had created conditions that favored sellers with properly maintained properties. My house qualified as properly maintained. 28 years of careful upkeep, recent updates to the kitchen and bathrooms, professional landscaping that I'd maintained myself every weekend. All those Saturday mornings spent pruning and planning while Brandon slept until noon suddenly seemed like investments rather than chores. The phone book still had value for certain tasks. I found 3 real estate agents with strong local reputations, all advertising quick sales and competitive commission rates. The first call would determine how seriously to pursue this plan. Morrison Realty, this is Sandra speaking. Sandra, my name is Robert Davis. I'm interested in listing my property for immediate sale. How quickly can something like this typically happen? Her voice sharpened with professional interest. That depends on several factors, Mr. Davis. Location, condition, pricing strategy. Are you looking at a specific timeline? 2 weeks maximum. Price isn't the primary concern, but speed is essential. I see. Would you be available for a property assessment this afternoon? I had a cancellation, and quick sales are definitely possible in this market if we position everything correctly. By 3 o'clock, Sandra Morrison was walking through my house with the practiced eye of someone who'd evaluated thousands of properties. Her assessment confirmed what my research had suggested. The house was positioned perfectly for rapid sale. Mr. Davis, properties in this condition don't stay on the market long. With aggressive pricing and proper staging, we could have offers within a week. What kind of aggressive pricing are we discussing? She consulted her tablet, comparing recent sales data with my property's specifications. I'd recommend listing at $790,000. That's slightly below market value, but it should generate multiple offers quickly. Speed versus maximum profit, essentially. $790,000. More money than I'd ever possessed at one time, enough to fund a comfortable retirement anywhere I chose to relocate. The number represented freedom I'd never seriously considered before yesterday evening. Let's proceed with that strategy. How soon can we have everything prepared? I can have professional photographs taken tomorrow morning, listing prepared by afternoon, and will be live on the market by Thursday. Weekend showings typically generate the most activity. The contract negotiations took 90 minutes of detailed discussion about commission structures, marketing strategies, and timeline expectations. Sandra's confidence was infectious, backed by market data that supported her optimistic projections. "Mr. Davis, I have to ask about your timeline. Most sellers need more notice to arrange alternative housing, coordinate moving services, handle the logistics of relocation. I'm highly motivated to complete this transaction quickly. The logistics will work themselves out." She nodded with the understanding of someone who'd handled clients going through major life transitions. Divorce, job relocation, family emergencies, all situations that required rapid property disposal regardless of optimal timing. After Sandra left with signed contracts and house keys for showing purposes, I walked through each room with new perspective. Not as a homeowner maintaining his property, but as someone preparing to abandon everything he'd built over 3 decades. The living room where Brandon had taken his first steps. The kitchen where I'd taught him to make pancakes on Sunday mornings when he was 8 years old. The backyard where we'd played catch until he decided sports were boring and video games more engaging. Every corner held memories of the relationship I'd thought we shared. But yesterday's conversation had revealed the truth about how he experienced those same moments. My guidance remembered as control. My concern interpreted as suffocation. My love perceived as manipulation designed to keep him dependent. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I'd been controlling without recognizing it. The line between caring parent and overbearing influence was apparently thinner than I'd understood, and somewhere along the way, I'd crossed it without noticing. The revelation stung, but it also clarified my decision. If Brandon truly felt suffocated by my presence, then removing that presence was an act of kindness rather than abandonment. He'd specifically requested my disappearance from his life. Granting that request was simply giving him what he'd asked for. My phone rang at 6:30. Brandon's name on the caller display, probably wondering about dinner arrangements or needing money for something essential that couldn't wait until morning. "Hey Dad, what's for dinner tonight? I was thinking we could order from that Italian place, maybe watch the game together." The casual assumption in his voice was remarkable. Less than 24 hours after telling his friends he wished I would disappear forever, he was making social plans that involved my credit card and my company. "Actually, Brandon, I have other plans tonight. You'll need to handle dinner yourself." A pause. He wasn't accustomed to being told no about anything, especially something as routine as meal arrangements. "Other plans? Like what? You never have plans on Tuesday nights." "Things change. I'm sure you can figure something out." "Dad, are you okay? You sound weird. Did something happen at work?" The concern in his voice might have been touching if I hadn't heard his real feelings expressed so clearly yesterday. This was performance, the same polite consideration he showed strangers who might prove useful later. "Everything's fine, son. Just busy with some projects that require my attention." "Okay, well, maybe tomorrow then. We could go to that steakhouse you like, make it a proper celebration since last night got kind of crazy with all my friends over." The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted to celebrate his birthday again, at my expense, after spending the previous evening discussing how much happier everyone would be if I simply vanished from existence. "We'll see how the week develops. Have a good evening, Brandon." I ended the call before he could respond, feeling oddly satisfied by the confusion I'd left in my wake. For 28 years, I'd been completely predictable, available whenever needed, financially generous without question, emotionally supportive regardless of how that support was received. The predictability had bred contempt. Brandon had learned to take my presence for granted, because I'd never given him reason to question my availability. He assumed I would always be there, always provide whatever he needed, always absorb his disrespect with patient understanding. Time to become unpredictable. The evening passed quietly as I researched retirement communities online. Arizona emerged as the frontrunner, with several developments specifically designed for active adults who wanted maintenance-free living and social opportunities. The photographs showed golf courses, swimming pools, community centers where people gathered for activities that had nothing to do with subsidizing ungrateful adult children. One community near Phoenix caught my attention. Desert Springs Senior Living offered furnished apartments, organized social activities, and proximity to cultural attractions I'd never had time to explore. The monthly fees were reasonable, especially when compared to what I'd been spending to maintain Brandon's lifestyle. I filled out an online inquiry form, requesting information about immediate availability. The response came within an hour, detailing several units that could be occupied with minimal notice. Arizona's warm climate and lower cost of living made it an attractive destination for California retirees seeking better value for their fixed incomes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was researching retirement communities while my 28-year-old son lived upstairs, unemployed and completely dependent on my financial support. Most men my age were helping their adult children establish independence. I was planning my escape from someone who'd never learned to function without parental subsidies. My laptop screen filled with photographs of people my age enjoying activities I'd forgotten existed. Book clubs, hiking groups, photography classes, volunteer opportunities. Communities where your worth wasn't measured by your willingness to write checks for someone else's comfort. The contrast with my current existence was stark. When had I last read a book for pleasure? Taken a vacation that wasn't centered around Brandon's needs? Spent money on something I wanted rather than something he required? The answer was depressing. Years had passed since I'd prioritized my own interests over his convenience. Every decision filtered through the question of how it would affect Brandon's situation rather than what might bring me satisfaction or growth. That pattern would end when the house sold. Desert Springs Senior Living represented more than just alternative housing. It represented the possibility of rediscovering who I was when nobody needed anything from me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Brandon. "Pizza sounds good for tomorrow night. That place on 5th Street you introduced me to. My treat this time." His treat. With what money? He hadn't held a job in 8 months, hadn't contributed to household expenses in 5 years, hadn't demonstrated any understanding of how money worked in the real world. His treat would inevitably become my expense, just like every other generous gesture he'd made over the years. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I returned to researching flight schedules between California and Arizona, one-way tickets, departure dates that aligned with anticipated house closing timelines. The logistics of disappearing from someone's life required more planning than I'd initially considered. The engineering mindset that Brandon found so suffocating was exactly what this situation required. Systematic analysis, careful coordination, attention to details that could derail the entire operation if overlooked. By the time he realized what was happening, all the pieces would already be in motion. Thursday morning brought Sandra Morrison's call with the news I'd been expecting. "Mr. Davis, we're live on the market as of 1 hour ago. I've already had 3 calls from buyer's agents requesting showing appointments for this weekend. The pricing strategy is working exactly as predicted." "Excellent. How many showings have you scheduled?" 6 so far, and it's not even noon yet. Properties in this condition with aggressive pricing create immediate interest. I'm optimistic we'll have offers by Sunday evening. Sunday evening. Less than a week from now, my house could be an escrow to buyers who actually wanted to live there. The timeline was accelerating beyond my most optimistic projections. "Keep me updated on all developments, Sandra. I'm prepared to move quickly on any serious offers." After ending the call, I walked through the house one more time, seeing it through the eyes of potential buyers rather than nostalgic memories. The hardwood floors I'd installed myself gleamed with years of careful maintenance. The kitchen renovation that had cost me a second mortgage looked professional and modern. The backyard landscaping created an oasis of privacy in our crowded neighborhood. Strangers would walk through this weekend, evaluating everything I'd built as either assets or liabilities. They'd stand in Brandon's room discussing how to convert it into an office or guest bedroom. They'd examine the basement workshop where I'd spent countless hours on projects, calculating whether the space could serve their own purposes. The house would become someone else's home, filled with different voices, different dreams, different family dynamics. People who appreciated having a place to live rather than taking it for granted while wishing the provider would disappear. Brandon's car pulled into the driveway as I stood at the living room window. He climbed out carrying grocery bags, probably ingredients for the elaborate dinner he'd been planning at my expense. The sight of him approaching the front door with such casual confidence struck me as the perfect symbol of everything wrong with our relationship. He expected to find me available, grateful for his company, ready to provide whatever support he needed without question. Instead, he was about to discover that his world had shifted in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The front door opened with his usual dramatic flair. "Dad, I got everything for that Italian feast we discussed. Figured we could cook together like old times, maybe talk about some stuff that's been on my mind." Things that had been on his mind. Probably more lectures about my controlling behavior, additional demands for space and independence, further explanations of why my involvement in his life felt burdensome rather than supportive. "Actually, Brandon, I have appointments this afternoon. You'll need to handle dinner yourself again." His expression shifted from enthusiasm to confusion to something approaching irritation. "Appointments? What kind of appointments? You didn't mention anything yesterday." "Business matters that require immediate attention, nothing that concerns you directly." The grocery bags rustled as he set them on the kitchen counter with unnecessary force. His body language telegraphed frustration with my sudden unavailability, confusion about why I wasn't conforming to his expectations. "Dad, what's going on? You've been acting strange since my birthday. Are you upset about something? Did I do something wrong?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Did he genuinely not remember wishing for my permanent disappearance? Or was this performance designed to reset our dynamic back to comfortable predictability? "Nothing's wrong, son. I'm simply busy with projects that require my focus." "What projects? You're retired. What could be so urgent that we can't have dinner together?" The entitlement in his voice was remarkable. Even when requesting my company, he framed it as something owed rather than something appreciated. My availability was assumed, my priorities secondary to his social preferences. "Brandon, you're 28 years old. Surely you can manage one evening without my participation." "That's not the point. We had plans. You can't just change everything without explanation." We had plans. Plans he'd made unilaterally, involving my time and money, with my participation assumed rather than requested. The pattern was so ingrained that he couldn't recognize his own presumption. I walked toward the front door, car keys in hand. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." "Dad, seriously, what is happening here? You're acting like a completely different person." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the young man who'd spent yesterday evening telling his friends that everyone would be happier if I disappeared from his life forever. Maybe I'm finally becoming the person I should have been all along. The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving Brandon alone with his grocery bags and his confusion. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing at the living room window, watching me drive away with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine bewilderment. For the first time in years, he had no idea what to expect from me. The weekend showings began at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and I positioned myself at Frank Henderson's house next door to observe the parade of potential buyers examining my life's work. Frank had been my neighbor for 15 years, a reliable man who helped with snow removal and accepted packages when I traveled. His kitchen window offered a perfect view of my front entrance. "Coffee's fresh if you want some," Frank offered, clearly curious about the unusual activity next door, but too polite to ask directly. "Thanks, just watching the process unfold." Through his window, I counted 11 different families touring my property over 6 hours. Young couples with notebooks, calculating mortgage payments and renovation costs. Empty nesters like myself, evaluating whether the space suited their downsizing plans. Investors with clipboards, assessing rental potential and profit margins. Each group spent roughly 20 minutes inside, long enough to examine every room, test faucets, check electrical outlets, and imagine their own furniture arranged in spaces where Brandon had lived rent-free for 5 years. Sandra Morrison moved between families with professional efficiency, highlighting features I'd installed myself, answering questions about neighborhood amenities and local schools. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers were evaluating my home's suitability for their families while my own son remained upstairs, completely unaware that his comfortable lifestyle was being appraised and potentially sold to people who would actually appreciate living there. Popular property, Frank observed, refilling my coffee cup. Haven't seen this much traffic since the Morrison place sold 3 years ago. Good location, well maintained, should move quickly. He nodded, still fishing for information I wasn't ready to share. Our friendship operated on comfortable boundaries that neither of us crossed without invitation. Frank understood that some situations required privacy rather than neighborly curiosity. My phone buzzed with Sandra's first update at 2:30. Mr. Davis, we've had tremendous interest. 3 families have requested second showings tomorrow, and I'm expecting at least 2 offers by Monday morning. Excellent progress. Keep me informed of all developments. Sunday brought even more activity. The families who'd requested return visits arrived with relatives, contractors, and measuring equipment. Serious buyers conducting due diligence rather than casual browsers, satisfying weekend curiosity. Sandra's excitement was evident in her frequent updates about growing interest and competitive positioning. Brandon spent both days gaming upstairs, occasionally wandering to the kitchen for snacks, completely oblivious to the real estate evaluation happening around him. His headphones blocked the sounds of strangers examining his bedroom, discussing how to convert his space into something more productive than unemployment headquarters. Saturday evening brought the conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Dad, what's with all the people traipsing through our house this weekend? Some real estate lady kept showing families around like she owned the place. He stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered unauthorized activity in his domain. The entitlement was breathtaking. His house, his domain, his right to question business decisions that didn't concern him. Just some routine property assessments, nothing that affects you directly. Property assessments? What does that mean? Are you refinancing or something? The innocent confusion in his voice almost made me reconsider the entire plan. Almost. Then I remembered his birthday wish, expressed with such casual cruelty to friends who'd laughed along with his mockery. Business matters, Brandon. Nothing you need to worry about. Business matters that involve strangers examining my bedroom? Dad, I have a right to know what's happening in my own house. His house. The possessive language revealed everything about how he viewed our living arrangement. Not his father's property where he lived by permission, but his own domain where he held equal claim to decision-making authority. Actually, it's my house, Brandon. My name on the deed, my money paying the mortgage, my decision how to handle property matters. The statement hung between us like a challenge neither of us had expected. For 28 years, I'd avoided asserting ownership directly, preferring to maintain the fiction that we shared equal stake in decisions affecting our living situation. Okay, technically it's your house, but I live here too. Don't I get any input about major changes? What kind of input did you seek before telling your friends you wished I would disappear from your life forever? The color drained from his face. Direct confrontation wasn't part of our usual dynamic. I typically absorbed his disrespect with patient understanding, never challenging him about statements he'd assumed I'd never hear. Dad, you weren't supposed to. That was just guys talking. You know how it is when friends get together and complain about their families. Just guys talking. Casual cruelty dismissed as normal social bonding, as if wishing for your father's permanent absence was comparable to complaining about household chores or work schedules. So you didn't mean it when you said everyone would be happier if I disappeared permanently? It's not that simple. Sometimes I get frustrated with with how things are between us. But that doesn't mean I actually want you gone. The backtracking was predictable, but the damage had been done. He'd revealed his authentic feelings when he thought I wasn't listening. This conversation was damage control, not genuine clarification. What specifically frustrates you about how things are between us, Brandon? He shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing this discussion might require more honesty than he was prepared to offer. You know, the way you're always asking about job applications, giving advice about my future, acting like I can't make decisions without your input. It feels controlling sometimes. Controlling to ask about employment when you've been unemployed for 8 months? The job market is brutal right now. You don't understand how different things are for my generation. It's not like when you were young and could just walk into a company and demand a position. The familiar deflection about generational differences, economic conditions beyond his control, circumstances that justified his continued dependence on parental support without any timeline for independence. Brandon, I've been supporting you financially for 5 years. Rent, utilities, food, car insurance, spending money, $50,000 annually while you search for the perfect position that meets your standards. I never asked you to support me. That was your choice. The breathtaking audacity of that statement nearly left me speechless. Never asked for support while living rent-free, eating food I purchased, driving a car I insured, using utilities I paid for. Never asked, just assumed it would continue indefinitely. You never asked because you never had to ask. I provided everything without being requested, which apparently you interpreted as obligation rather than generosity. Dad, where is this coming from? Why are we having this conversation now? Because I finally heard your honest opinion about our relationship, and I've decided to respect your feelings. The vague answer clearly unsettled him, but I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of changes already in motion. Better to let him wonder about my intentions than provide information he might use to interfere with plans nearly ready for implementation. Monday morning brought Sandra's call with news that would finalize everything. Mr. Davis, we have 2 offers, both above asking price. The Peterson family offered $805,000, all cash, 30-day closing. The Williamson family offered $815,000, also cash, but they need 45 days to coordinate their relocation from Seattle. $815,000. More than I dared hope for. Enough to fund a comfortable retirement anywhere I chose to relocate. The Peterson offer's timeline aligned perfectly with my strategic requirements. I'll accept the Peterson offer. 30 days gives me adequate time to coordinate my own arrangements. Excellent choice. They're pre-approved, highly motivated, and their inspector can begin this week. I'll have contracts prepared by this afternoon. The legal documents felt substantial in my hands when I signed them Tuesday morning. 30 days until closing, 30 days to coordinate the most dramatic life change I'd ever undertaken. Brandon would spend those weeks assuming everything would continue as normal, completely unaware that his comfortable world was about to collapse. That evening, I made the call that would complete my escape plan. Desert Springs Senior Living, this is Margaret speaking. Margaret, I submitted an inquiry last week about immediate housing availability. My timeline has accelerated, and I need to coordinate occupancy within 30 days. Of course, Mr. Davis. We have several furnished units available for immediate occupancy. Would you prefer our standard apartment or one of our premium units with enhanced amenities? Premium unit, cost isn't the primary concern, but privacy and independence are essential. Perfect. Our premium units offer separate entrances, private patios, and priority access to all community facilities. Monthly fees include utilities, housekeeping, and unlimited access to our dining facilities and activity programs. The monthly cost was less than half what I'd been spending to subsidize Brandon's unemployment. Desert Springs offered independence, social opportunities, and freedom from family obligations that had consumed 30 years of my life. I'd like to reserve a unit immediately. How quickly can we complete the paperwork? We can handle everything electronically if speed is important. Security deposit, first month's fees, and lease documents can be processed within 48 hours. By Wednesday afternoon, I had legal contracts for both selling my current house and purchasing my new life in Arizona. 30 days to coordinate the logistics of disappearing from someone's life who'd specifically requested my absence. The engineering precision of this plan satisfied every aspect of my methodical nature. Variables controlled, timelines synchronized, resources allocated efficiently. Brandon had wished for my disappearance, and I was granting that wish with professional competence he'd never appreciated. Thursday brought the home inspection that would determine whether the sale proceeded smoothly or encountered obstacles requiring negotiation. Professional inspectors spent 4 hours examining every system I'd maintained for 3 decades, testing electrical circuits, plumbing connections, heating efficiency, and structural integrity. Their report, delivered Friday afternoon, contained no significant issues. Minor recommendations about weather stripping and caulking, easily addressed with weekend hardware store visits. The Peterson family's purchase would proceed without complications. Brandon remained completely oblivious to the activity surrounding him. Home inspectors examining his bedroom while he slept until noon. contractors evaluating the basement workshop where he stored gaming equipment instead of tools. Real estate professionals calculating the value of everything he'd taken for granted. The weekend passed quietly as I began mental preparation for conversations that would reshape both our lives permanently. Monday would bring the 21-day countdown to closing, time enough to coordinate my relocation without providing advance warning that might complicate my strategic objectives. Sunday evening found me in my home office researching flight schedules between California and Arizona, one-way tickets, departure dates that aligned with house closing requirements. The logistics of vanishing from someone's life required more coordination than I'd initially anticipated. My laptop screen filled with travel options, all representing freedom I'd never seriously considered before Brandon's birthday revelation. Morning flights that would have me in Phoenix before he woke up. Evening departures that would give me time to handle final arrangements without emotional confrontations. The phone rang at 8:30. Brandon's name on the display, probably wanting to discuss dinner plans or weekend activities that assumed my continued availability for his entertainment. "Hey, Dad, I was thinking we could drive up to Lake Tahoe next weekend. I found this great rental house online, and the weather's supposed to be perfect for hiking and fishing." The casual assumption that I would fund and participate in his vacation plans was remarkable. Less than 2 weeks after expressing his wish for my permanent disappearance, he was making elaborate plans that required my financial support and company. "That sounds expensive, Brandon. What's your budget for the trip?" A pause. He wasn't accustomed to being asked about financial contributions to activities he proposed. "Well, I thought maybe you could handle the rental house and I could cover food and gas, split things fairly between us." Split things fairly. His contribution would amount to perhaps $200, while mine would exceed $1,000. His definition of fairness consistently involved my money subsidizing his entertainment. "I'll have to check my schedule and get back to you." "Check your schedule? Dad, you're retired. What schedule could you possibly have?" The dismissive tone revealed his assumption that retirement meant unlimited availability for his convenience. My time belonged to him by default, my priorities secondary to his social preferences. "Things change, Brandon. I'll let you know about the weekend." "Okay, but don't take too long to decide. The good rental places get booked quickly, and I already told some friends they could join us if we get a big enough house." Already told friends they could join us, without consulting me about guest lists or additional expenses, planning a vacation at my expense with people I'd never met, assuming my compliance with arrangements I'd never approved. "We'll discuss it later in the week." I ended the call before he could add more details to plans that would never happen. In 3 weeks, he'd be dealing with housing problems more immediate than weekend vacation rentals. Reality would intrude on his comfortable assumptions about continued parental subsidies. The irony was perfect. He was planning elaborate getaways while I planned the ultimate getaway from him. His casual expectations about my availability would soon be replaced by desperate confusion about my absence. Tuesday brought Sandra's update about final paperwork and closing coordination, everything proceeding smoothly toward the transfer of ownership that would eliminate Brandon's comfortable lifestyle permanently. "Mr. Davis, the Petersons are thrilled with the inspection results. No issues whatsoever, and they're eager to complete the purchase. Closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from Thursday at 10 a.m. "Perfect timing. I'll be ready to transfer possession immediately after the paperwork is completed." "Will you need recommendations for moving services? Most sellers require several weeks to coordinate relocation logistics." "I travel light, Sandra. My arrangements are already in place." She didn't press for details, understanding that some clients preferred privacy about their post-sale plans. Professional discretion was part of her service, and I appreciated her respect for boundaries I wasn't ready to cross. That evening, Brandon approached me with unusual seriousness about our Lake Tahoe discussion. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said regarding budgets and schedules. Maybe we could plan something simpler, more affordable. A day trip instead of a whole weekend." The conciliatory tone was unexpected. Either he was genuinely trying to be more considerate, or he sensed something different in my recent responses to his assumptions. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, there's that state park about 2 hours north. We could pack lunch, do some hiking, maybe fish if they're biting. Just the two of us, like when I was a kid." The nostalgic appeal struck deeper than I'd expected. Memories of weekend camping trips when Brandon still enjoyed my company, still looked forward to adventures that didn't require expensive accommodations or elaborate planning. That does sound more manageable. Great. I was also thinking maybe I should start contributing more around here. Help with groceries, utilities, that kind of thing. I know I've been taking advantage of your generosity. The admission caught me completely off guard. Was this genuine recognition of our dysfunctional dynamic or manipulation designed to secure continued support? After years of entitlement, why was he suddenly acknowledging his dependence? What brought this on, Brandon? I don't know. You've seemed different lately, less available, more focused on your own stuff. It made me realize how much I rely on you for everything. Different lately. He'd noticed the subtle changes in my behavior, the reduced availability, the questions about his financial contributions. Some part of him was registering that our relationship was shifting in ways he couldn't control. What kind of contribution are you considering? Maybe I could get a part-time job, something to cover my personal expenses while I keep looking for career opportunities. That way I'm not completely dependent on you for everything. A part-time job. After 8 months of unemployment and 5 years of complete financial dependence, he was suddenly motivated to seek employment. The timing was suspicious, but the gesture represented more acknowledgement of reality than I'd heard in years. That would be a significant change from your current approach to financial responsibility. I know I haven't been the most motivated job seeker. Maybe it's time to lower my standards and take whatever's available while I figure out what I really want to do. Lower his standards. For years, he'd rejected positions because they didn't meet his expectations about status, salary, or professional development. Now, he was suddenly willing to consider work beneath his perceived qualifications. What changed your mind about employment standards? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Honestly, hearing you ask about my budget for the lake trip made me realize how unfair our arrangement has become. You shouldn't have to fund my entertainment when I'm perfectly capable of working. The honesty was refreshing, but it came 3 weeks too late. Legal documents were already signed, closing dates scheduled, new housing arrangements confirmed in Arizona. His recognition of our dysfunctional dynamic arrived precisely when changing course was no longer possible. I appreciate the acknowledgement, Brandon. Financial independence would benefit both of us. So maybe we could postpone the hiking trip until I get a job and can pay my own way. It would mean more to me knowing I earned the money for our adventure. The mature perspective was everything I'd hoped to hear for years. But timing in life matters more than good intentions, and his transformation was occurring exactly when it could no longer influence my decision to disappear from his life. Let's see how things develop over the next few weeks. The conversation with Brandon lingered in my mind as I finalized the last details of my disappearance plan. His sudden maturity felt genuine, but it had arrived at the precise moment when redemption was no longer possible. The contracts were signed, the timeline locked in place, and his comfortable world would collapse in 18 days, whether he found employment or not. Wednesday morning brought a call from Desert Springs confirming my Arizona apartment was ready for immediate occupancy. Thursday's flight would take me directly into my new life, arriving hours before Brandon would even realize I was gone. The timing was surgical in its precision. I spent my final days completing practical arrangements, banking transfers to Arizona institutions, mail forwarding to my new address, utility cancellations timed to coincide with the house closing. Each task brought me closer to freedom I'd never imagined possible at 62 years old. Brandon continued his job search with surprising dedication, submitting applications and scheduling interviews with energy I hadn't seen in years. But his transformation came too late to change the fundamental equation. He'd wished for my disappearance, and that wish was about to be granted completely. The morning of my departure, I left a single envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside, a brief note explaining that I'd decided to honor his birthday request for my permanent absence from his life. No forwarding address, no contact information, no opportunity for negotiation or emotional manipulation. By the time he returned from his latest job interview, I was already 30,000 feet above the desert, watching California disappear beneath the aircraft wings. The house would be his problem to figure out when the new owners took possession next week. His comfortable assumptions about continued support had ended the moment I boarded that plane. Arizona welcomed me with warm sunshine and possibilities I'd forgotten existed. Desert Springs offered everything I'd researched online, plus the unexpected joy of conversations with people who wanted my company rather than my money. For the first time in decades, I was valued for who I was instead of what I could provide. Brandon's birthday wish had been granted with the precision he'd never appreciated in my engineering work. He'd wanted me gone from his life forever, and now he had exactly what he'd requested. The independence he'd always demanded, the freedom from my supposedly controlling presence, the space to make his own decisions without paternal interference. Sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give is teaching their child what absence actually costs. Brandon was about to receive that education, and I was finally free to discover who I was when nobody needed anything from me. The desert sunset painted the sky in colors I'd never noticed during all those years of worry and obligation. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new friendships, new possibilities for a man who'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being appreciated. Brandon had gotten his birthday wish, and so had I.